A scientific breakthrough is only a small part of building a successful enterprise. And this is something that I think has maybe coming from a scientific background, being on the technical side of most of the projects I've worked on, most of the companies I've worked on, it's something I don't necessarily, I didn't have an early appreciation for this fact. But the fact is that like Coca-Cola is a marketing company, first and foremost, right? There's very little or none at all innovation happening on the science side. Breakthroughs on the science side are continually allowing new things to be possible that can potentially have implications for the way that tasks are accomplished throughout like a value chain. In and of themselves, scientific breakthroughs are often just footnotes in research, and their implications are only felt, years, sometimes decades, sometimes even centuries after the initial discovery. I think, the breakthroughs in mathematics has preceded their application by, in some cases, centuries. This is one of those instances, of course, now where where the time between discovery and application has potentially shrunk to being closer than it ever has been before. Remember reading this in, I think it was the Power Law, about how the incentives of modern venture capital and the relationship between modern venture capital and the sort of industry of science, or the practice of science, has created the most powerful feedback loop for applied science that's ever existed in history. And I think that makes total sense. Like, it is truly a discovery and application of discovery machine, because, and I think obviously we're living through the latest wave of that right now. Let's, fingers crossed it's not the last wave of these trends. But when people who are kind of like on the edges of science, on the edges of what's possible, are given access to resources to sort of like carry out a motion to explore the implications of that breakthrough are for society, you end up with a really powerful machine. And of course, that's the startup world. I think one of the people I interviewed many years ago referred to it as the veil growing thin between the realm of like the scientifically possible and the sort of applied, the things that are actually kind of happening in the world. And I think that's a wonderful phrase. I think of it personally as the fountain, the frothy fountain of invention, and sort of the attempt to divert some amount of that energy, of that froth, into like a funnel, into a river that then impacts the world, blows on from there. So I think working at that intersection for me is exciting. I wish I'd found it earlier in my life. I think I've always enjoyed the intellectual challenges. I've always been a bit competitive, and I've always really loved science. So yeah, it's a natural fit for me in a lot of ways. I guess one thing that you need to be relatively risk on to enjoy the work, because, there's a high amount of like volatility, a lot of emotional volatility in starting new things. I think whether or not you're on the founder side or the investor side, I think obviously there's a lot more potential volatility on the founder side, but even on the investor side, you're dealing with like marketplaces that change very, very rapidly and that can be interrupted. And you're dealing with companies and with entities that are going through tremendous change year over year, month over month sometimes. So it's a place where you have to be relatively level-headed, I think, to thrive in that ecosystem.